I hope I'm not going too fast, but I don't think I am. Anyway, this is the 57th day, third video. To give you context of where we are, in a chronological survey, this is now the second period, the historical period, or the classical period. History's begun. I'm up to the fifth people, I think, A, B, C, D, E. The Hebrew people, Hebrew literature, drawing from what Christians call the Old Testament. The book of Samuel 1 and 2 is the one I want to move to now. And there's where you will find the David stories, the stories about King David. And basically, after we're done with the David stories, I'm going to leave Hebrew literature and go to the Greek. Well, with the David stories, we find out that David was not the first king. The first king was a king named Saul, and I write down King Saul because if you only write Saul, you could confuse him with a character in the New Testament who converted and became Paul. This is King Saul. He was a bad king. He lost his mind eventually. He was going crazy. We find out about the prophet Samuel. Well, see, the Hebrews believed that there was a prophet that knew what God wanted. And when the prophet spoke, those basically were the words from God. And they didn't need a king, Samuel felt, but they wanted a king. It was sort of the modern thing to do. And Samuel, as I understand the story, Samuel was told, okay, God told him, they can have a king. Samuel said, well, where do you start? How do you start a king? And he said, go to such and such a town. First guy that comes through town, stop him, pour some oil on his head. He's going to be the king. Now, I may not be getting this right, but my version of the story is King Saul, he was a donkey herder, and he went through town. I almost think his donkeys were loose or something. He was chasing his donkeys. But anyway, he was the guy that came through town, and big man, Samuel stopped him, poured oil on his head, he became king, King Saul. But he didn't continue to listen to what the prophet said, and gradually lost his connection with God and went crazy. Read the book. I mean, I'm just giving you an idea of what's there. If you really want to know these stories, get a Bible and read these. Well, he had a son, Jonathan. He's had 6 or 7 sons, but Jonathan is the one that's really important, and you'll see him in the video that I'm going to ask you to watch. He becomes important for other reasons too. And now we find out about David. Now, David was not a descendant of Jonathan. Of Saul. David was the son of Jesse. These are such common people's names. David, and we find out about David. He has a harp, and he's able to compose psalms. Well, his harp. I always like to point out to the kids that David's first claim to fame was as a singer and a poet and a musician. He could make up these wonderful psalms and sing them. It became very important ultimately because he was able to calm the king down when Saul would be losing his mind and going crazy. If David would play his harp and sing, he could calm the king down. So in a way, we've got a hero with a special weapon, in a sense, although we'll add, I knew there was a special weapon missing. I'll add it in a moment. But anyway, the kind of things that he sang, not the only ones, he also sang some laments, which I'll tell you about. But psalms. Now, if you'll jump to the genres mentioned in class, I think this might be the 3rd section of your notes, I'd like you to add psalm as a genre. This is a kind of literature. I define it, an ancient Hebrew song about God. And it's more or less equal to hymns, to a hymn. Now, to the best of my knowledge, there are no more psalms. People aren't composing new psalms. They are composing new hymns all the time. So hymns is a extant, or I guess you go, well, it's a current genre. Psalms, it seem to be a closed class. But anyway, of all the psalms, there's a book of psalms in the Old Testament. I believe there's around 150 of them, and I think about half of them are attributed to David. But of all of them, the one that's by far the most important is known as its number, the 23rd Psalm. Some kids can't come up with a number, but they can come up with the name, the Lord is my shepherd. And again, in this part of the world, which tends to be quite a religious area, I can usually find some student. Well, I'll challenge the student. Can anybody say that? And I'll sometimes have a kid, off he'll go and he'll say the whole thing. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down beside in green pastures. I say I'm going to get it mixed up because but the kids don't. Or if I coach them a little bit, they can keep going. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. These are very, very famous words. And I like to point out that they are so commonly used at funerals in a Christian community because they are so comforting. All right, but being a student, not a biblical scholar, not a Sunday school teacher, but rather more an English teacher, I see here the oldest famous metaphor that I know of. And so once again, I would have you jump in your notes to literary devices. I don't know what section that is. I'm just going to guess 7 point something, 8.7, I don't know, 6 point something. But anyway, we had a simile. Well, here's a metaphor. A metaphor is a comparison not using like or as. Notice that I underlined not to stress it, and notice that I did not leave the mistake off the board. I put those quotes in there, not using the words like or as. And an example of a metaphor is the Lord is my shepherd. David didn't say the Lord is like a shepherd to me and I am like a sheep. No. He said the Lord is my shepherd. Metaphors are stronger, more emphatic than similes. All right, let's see. The most famous story probably about David of all is when he goes up against this giant of a man named Goliath. David's harp and his psalms and his sling. Everyone was afraid of this giant of a man, Goliath. No one would fight him. He's supposed to fight him one-on-one, and here goes the boy, David, up against Goliath, which is laughable. But David has a sling, and I always like to point out, I don't mean a slingshot. When I was a kid, I thought, oh yeah, slingshots are fun. No, this is a sling that a deadly weapon, really, with a stone in there. And David had a sling. It's a poor person's, a shepherd's weapon. He goes up against Goliath and he strikes him right in the center of his forehead and kills Goliath. Then chops his head off, and he becomes a hero in the eyes of his people, even though he's just a boy. Well, this scene is so well done. In a movie called King David, this stars Richard Gere. I don't know what the year of it is, but I would like you very much to find it. It's on YouTube. This channel, Angelica Faith 101, is the place that I found it, but you might be able to find it elsewhere. And I would go to part 3 if you go to that channel. I'm not ready to say that I recommend this whole movie, especially if some of your viewers are little children. I'm quite sure that there's some nudity in it. I think there is lots of violence. But that particular part where David goes up against Goliath is so well done. I recommend it highly. That would be something for you to do over the weekend. This is Friday. I'll see you on Monday, I hope.